So the other day there was a horrible traffic accident on the TransCanada Highway west of Calgary. The highway was literally shut down. Hundreds of cars just stopped. So some people drove through side roads to get around the accident. I've done that too at exactly the same place. That part of the highway goes through the Stoney Indian Reserve, so people used other roads on the reserve to get past the accident. Now, the TransCanada Highway going through the reserve is great for the Stoney. They recently built a huge hotel and casino right by the highway. You can't miss it as you drive by. They have other restaurants and shops in the area too. Without that traffic, those businesses wouldn't be viable. The jobs there, the money those businesses make, just wouldn't happen. The Stoney depend on the traffic, much of it Calgarians driving out to Banff. Calgarians loved the Stoney, by the way, in 2013 when those river floods wrecked homes in Calgary. They also flooded homes on the reserve. Calgarians sent help en masse. Absolutely neighborly behavior. I wouldn't even call it charity. I'd say it was more like family. But a few days ago when the highway was closed, a lot of Calgarians went through the reserve more than normal. But some residents on the reserve set up roadblocks, toll booths, really, like a little medieval drawbridge, and they demanded $20 from each car to pass through. It was a shakedown. These weren't even band officials. The band leadership claims they didn't know about this. These were just really highwaymen, stopping traffic in return for cash. No color of right, no lawful authority. Some other people with a different spirit might have set up a lemonade stand to voluntarily sell lemonade to passing cars. No, these thugs went onto the road, blocked traffic, demanded money, and they put it in their own pockets. Some of these thugs made upwards of $500. Sure beats working, eh? So what happened? Well, Ken Christensen, the administrator of the band council, told reporters, quote, "There was no chief and council approval for it. I'm not going to condemn it. The Stoney members own the land, and you've got people trespassing, basically," unquote. So he's not for it, but he's not against it. So much for the rule of law, but where's the chief? Where are the elders, the role models? So someone shook down Calgarians during a crisis, and no one will say it's wrong? But even that bureaucratic statement was inaccurate. I mean, Stoney band members do not own the land. Individual Indians aren't allowed to own property on a reserve, let alone a road. It's all owned in commune by the band, that is, by the government. That's what the Indian Act says. So the extortionists here actually didn't have any property rights themselves without the legal authority of the band council. But what about the second part of what Christensen said, that the white folks driving through the reserve were trespassing on roads? Trespassing by driving on a road? That was a good enough answer for the NDP Premier Rachel Notley. Here's what she told reporters when asked about the highway shakedown. I'm going to read it through and then go through it line by line. Here's Notley, quote, "What I've been advised by our transportation officials is that we were put into a position where that was the only possible detour that we could use. And that's unfortunate, but that was what it was. We have to acknowledge that First Nations have rights on their reserve land akin to or greater than certainly private property owners. And you know, they are going to make decisions and we don't have jurisdiction on that. Hopefully we won't be in a position where we have to detour on that specific point on the highway in the future," unquote. So the first line, the detour was unfortunate, but that was what it was. All right, fine. The detour was unfortunate, but there are detours every day on some road in Alberta. I think the horrific car crash was more unfortunate, but fine. To her, the real misfortune here was some traffic. Okay. But listen to what she said next, quote, "We have to acknowledge that First Nations have rights on their reserve land akin to or greater than certainly private property owners," unquote. What does that mean? When she says First Nations have rights, I presume she means the Indian band itself, the Indian government, the chief and band council, because they control land on reserves more than a white government controls land off reserves. You can't own your own house on the Stoney Reserve. Everything is owned by the government, but we already know that the band itself didn't set up these tolls or approve them. Individual thugs did. So let's look at that line again. We have to acknowledge that First Nations have rights on their reserve land akin to or greater than certainly private property owners. Akin to or greater than private property owners? What does that mean? The question is not whether the band has more rights than private property owners. The question is whether the band or anyone on it has more rights than someone driving through. What's she even saying? Is she saying that the Indian band government has more rights on those roads than a non-Indian driver on the road? Or is she saying any individual Indian on the reserve has more rights? Look, Notley's a lawyer, by the way. Can you even understand what she's saying? Do you think she even understands what she's saying? All right, next sentence. So she said it was unfortunate. Then she said First Nations have powerful property rights, which is half true. And then she said, quote, "And you know they are going to make those decisions and we don't have jurisdiction on that." hang on, who's going to make those decisions? The band council or individual Indians? It was individual extortionists who made the decision to shake people down, and she thinks she doesn't have jurisdiction over them as the chief legislator of the province to do anything about that? So in her mind, she has no jurisdiction, no responsibility to enforce the law against what could really be characterized as highway robbery. That's her view. So Indian reserves are no-go zones for police. The RCMP provide policing in much of rural Alberta, but that's under a contract. The government of Alberta signs a contract with the RCMP to police on their behalf. Is she saying that she doesn't think the law applies there, that police and prosecutors have no power there? She's just saying that? What other laws would she not enforce on reserve? On what basis is she saying any of this? And then in closing, this line: hopefully we won't be in a position where we have to detour on that specific point on the highway in the future. So that's it, that's all she's got. Well, it's all so unfortunate, but I'm so powerless as the Premier, and you know, something jurisdiction, something property rights. Okay, let's just all hope this doesn't happen anymore, because I sure am uncomfortable being a decision maker when it doesn't involve raising taxes or something like that. Question: now that the entire province knows how unintelligible the Premier is about Indian reserves and how muddled she is, but more importantly, how impotent she chooses to be and how accepting of crime she is, do you think this sort of thing will happen more or less in the future? Do you think there will be more or fewer shakedowns like this? Now, in one moment, I'll tell you about the law about roads on reserves, roads paid for by taxpayers of all ethnicities and races. But let me talk for a moment about the local leadership on the Stoney Reserve. There are about 3,500 people in the band, so it's really a small town. Like I say, the town had a tough time 2 years ago, but then Calgarians helped bail them out. So what has the chief of the band said about this? Nothing I've seen, just that band administrator with a passive-aggressive statement that he's not going to approve it or condemn it. So the chief of the band has nothing to say. Sorry, did I say chief? I meant chiefs. See, most towns of 3,500 people would have a mayor and a few aldermen, and that would be a part-time gig, maybe pay the mayor $10,000 a year, really a glorified volunteer position. But look here, the Stoney Indian Band, according to their own financial disclosure, has not one, not two, but three chiefs for the little towns. Darcy Dixon is the chief for Bearspaw. He makes $125,000 a year tax-free, plus $109,000 a year in expenses. So about $300,000 a year equivalent to someone living off the reserve. So he makes more money than the Prime Minister of Canada. And the four councillors from Bearspaw, they're making six figures each as well. But there are two other chiefs. Bruce LaBelle, the chief for Chiniki, made $175,000 for just 9 months of work, plus his $71,000 in expenses. That's amazing. What $71,000 in expenses can you possibly rack up to be the mini mayor of what, 1,000 people max? And then Chief Ernest Wesley of the Wesley part of the band, he earned $241,000 last year, plus $97,000 in expenses, so comparable to someone off reserve making about $500,000. Altogether, these three chiefs and councillors got paid $2.2 million tax-free and expensed an additional $1 million last year to run a little village. But look at that little village. I mentioned the floods from 2 years ago that Calgarians helped so much. Well, take a look. It's 2 years later, and ordinary Indians, not the fancy millionaire chiefs, the ordinary Indians are still living in temporary trailers set up 2 years ago. I read a band newsletter from earlier this year that said they're hoping to have some permanent housing start later this year, but only for certain people who are a priority. I'm just going to take a wild guess that the chiefs and councillors and their families will be higher up the priorities list. Just speculation on my part. As we head into the third year without houses, I don't know, maybe they need more chiefs to solve this problem or to pay them more? Yeah, like I say, I think I see where the moral example on this reserve is coming from. But what's the law? I called up Ken Christensen, the band manager. I asked him if the tolls were on private land or public land, private roads or public roads. He said they were private roads, but that didn't make sense. Why would someone take a shortcut on a private road, say a road that would only lead to one person's house? I asked him how he defined a public or a private road. He said if it had a no trespassing sign on it, boom, that makes it private. Well, no, that's not how it works. Now, Ken's not a politician and he's not a lawyer. He's actually an engineer. but a public road is a road that the public pays for, that the public maintains. Whether someone puts up a sign or a toll booth or a lemonade stand doesn't make it private. What is the status of land on an Indian reserve? What is the status of a road? I concede it is a very complicated question. I'm not an expert in it, and clearly Ken Christensen isn't either, and neither is Premier Notley. I consulted one lawyer I know who represents several Indian bands, and even he acknowledged this is an obscure legal question. Fine. But let me read to you a law called Treaty 7. It's the treaty that created the Stoney Reserve in 1877. It talks about roads and who can go on them. Here, let me read from it. This is from the very first section of the treaty outlining what is or isn't Indian land on the reserve. And I quote, "First, the reserves of the Blackfeet, Blood, and Sarcee bands of Indians shall consist of," and then it describes in great detail the border of the reserves. And then it continues by listing what isn't included in the reserve and what Queen Victoria would keep for herself. Quote, "Reserving to Her Majesty, as may now or hereafter be required by her, for the use of her Indian and other subjects from all the reserves herein before described, the right to navigate the above-mentioned rivers, to build bridges and establish ferries thereon, to use the fords thereof and all the trails leading thereto, and to open such other roads through the said reserves as may appear to Her Majesty's Government of Canada necessary for the ordinary travel of her Indian and other subjects," unquote. The only compensation that Indians can get for this is when the road is built on their land in the first place. They get paid by the road builder, not by travelers through tolls. Here, let me quote, "Due compensation being paid to individual Indians for improvements when the same may be in any manner encroached upon by such roads," unquote. So that's the law. Stoney Indians get a reserve, but everyone, the Queen's Indian and other subjects, that means people from Calgary, they get to travel on the roads. And the only payment Indians get for this is if the building of the road itself is on Indian land. They get a payment for that. Now, Christensen couldn't tell me exactly where the tolls were, what roads they were on, but he confirmed that the roads in question were maintained by the government, that all the roads are either maintained by the Band Council or the province, neither of which makes it private, neither of which allows individual shakedown artists the right to charge tolls. Look, here's what needs to happen. The 3 chiefs and the many councillors of the Stoney Reserve need to send a clear public message that the kind of vigilante shakedowns on the reserve are morally inappropriate and probably illegal. The chief and councillors themselves need to say it. The appropriate police force, in this case, probably the RCMP, as contracted by the province of Alberta, must investigate any cases of this shakedown. And if there's enough evidence, they need to charge someone with extortion or any other modern version of the ancient crime of being a highwayman robber. And the Premier herself must state that reserves are not lawless islands in this province of Alberta, that what happened was not just legally wrong, but that it was politically wrong and it was immoral, and that she won't give it a pass simply because she, like so many other leftists, is soft on crime and condescending when it comes to Aboriginal people. And the good people of the Stoney Reserve must take back their place. They must realize that a handful of thugs and a dozing group of millionaire chiefs have caused their band a tremendous disservice and has hurt their reputation with their friends and customers in Calgary. For TheRebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.